There's a big problem with competency. People look at a string of letters after a person's name and say, that person is competent. All that proves is that you've passed exams. It doesn't mean that you are competent. It doesn't mean that you see beyond what's inside in front of you. Take, for example, the Churchill Theatre in Bromley. That was opened in 1977. Ken Wilson was the architect, and they were cladding the front of that building with slate. I was about 15 years old at the time, and I was driving past with my father. He was a quantity surveyor and building surveyor, so he knew a lot. And I said, Dad, they're doing it wrong, they're doing it wrong. He said, what do you mean? I said, they're all going to fall off. He said, why? I said, they aren't fixing it back mechanically. You need to screw them on. And he says, no, they've got an architect, they know what they're doing. Well, within 3 or 4 months, they had hoardings out there, they had fans out there, all these slates were dropping off. Now, we had a very competent architect who'd completely forgotten that slate comes in layers, multiple layers, and they will fall off if you're not fixing them on properly. So you've got a 15-year-old who spots the problem, you've got an architect of many years who has got a string of qualifications after his name, you've got the builders who are well qualified and everything, and not one of them has had the competency to see the problem that they're creating. So you can actually have somebody with no qualification whatsoever who is working on a job. I knew a QS who could not pass his exams. He was a darn good QS. He knew the SMM backwards. He could do his job, he just couldn't pass exams. But there are people in the office, there was one young lady who would pick up a scale rule and use whatever side it was that turned up. So her measurements were completely wrong. You know, she passed the exams, he couldn't. He was competent, she was incompetent. So actually at the end of the day, competency can only be measured on the ability of the person to apply what they know to the situation. My daughter has just moved into a new block of flats. It's lovely, they're sprinklered. It's only 5 stories high and they've got sprinklers in them. The corridor to the properties, lovely fire doors. Smoke doors, 3mm gaps around the top, larger gap at the bottom. So I immediately had a look, where's the automatic seal, the threshold seal at the bottom? Oh, they were there. Yeah, they were there. They fitted perfectly between the stops. So perfectly that the button on the end of the threshold strips just touched the door frame. Therefore, they didn't work. The person installing them didn't know that it had to be pressed in, that you had to move it 4 or 5 millimeters to one side so the actual thing would work. That building has been passed off, everyone's been in there, they've looked at the building, they've passed it. NHBC, they did the building control on it. Perfect, they've got a threshold. Nobody thought to themselves, does it work? And that is where the competency comes in. It is looking further. And unfortunately, we are training people in school to go on the internet, to do their research, cut and paste and just rewrite it in your own words, and then put the source of where you got it from. We're not training people to think and ask the questions behind what they've read as to how it would work, how it fits together, how you're actually going to make something happen. The other thing I found at schools is that if you raise questions, if you see the problems, if you are ironing out the problems before they arise, they say you're negative. If you ask questions in class, what happens? Everyone goes, ugh. Because one person is saying, I don't understand it, or one person is saying, but that's going to do this. And until we actually get people who can think for themselves, who can look at the documentation, who can query it, who can look at what's in front of them and say, that doesn't work, we won't get the problems that they've got in my daughter's flat, where inside the flat, under every single door, there is a threshold between the living room and the hall, 15 millimetres high. So no ramp on either side, just a thing. And you watch my grandson running in, boom, flat on his face. Nobody saw it. Where was the competence? Because in building regulations, the threshold with a ramp of 5 millimetres or more, which you then have to ramp up, only applies to front doors. So they ignored it internally.
So where do we set that benchmark then, Arnold?
We set the benchmark by actually looking and finding out whether the person can actually do the job properly. It's not a string of names. It has to figures at the end of your name. And you can't measure it until you actually see them doing the work. And you can spot the people who know what they're doing, who understand it. Those are the competent ones.